You live for
I hate go say.
I'm gonna go put my stuff shirt on.
Oh, are we ready?
Got one to tell you.
Okay, go for it. Okay, talk slow.
First off, I want to thank you guys for coming. I want to talk to you today about something that interests me, and I hope it'll be of interest to you when we're finished. We're going to talk about the Roaring Twenties. A lot of people think the Roaring Twenties was a time where everybody just danced and drank a lot. It is true that people spend a lot of time doing these things, but they did other things too. They went to the movies, listened to the radio, read, and played games. The decade, in fact, was marked by an explosion of popular culture, pushed by the development of mass media, which was pushed by post-war advances in technology. The most familiar symbol of the 20s is probably the flapper. A flapper was a young woman who, with bobbed hair, wore short skirts, who drank, smoked, and said what might be termed unladylike things more than previous generations. Now, not all women were flappers, although many did adopt a fashionable flapper wardrobe. During the 20s, women gained some freedoms. They could vote at last. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution had guaranteed this right in 1920. Millions of women worked, and new technology such as washing machines and vacuums made household chores much easier for women. During the 1920s, many Americans had extra money to spend, and they spent it on consumer goods such as clothes and home appliances. But the most important consumer product of the 1920s was the automobile. The Ford Model T cost just $260 in 1924. Obviously a lot different than cars are now. In 1929, there was one car on the road for every 5 Americans. Cars also gave young people the freedom to go where they wanted and do what they wanted. But most young people just wanted to do one thing. They wanted to dance, and the most popular of those being the Charleston. During the 1920s, some freedoms were expanded while others were cut off. The 18th Amendment to the Constitution had banned the manufacture and sale of intoxicating liquors. On January 16, 1920, the Federal Volstead Act closed every tavern, bar, and saloon in the United States. This only caused the liquor trade to go underground, which led to organized crime figures such as Al Capone. In the 1920s, people turned more and more to criminal activity. Criminals like Al Capone, Bonnie and Clyde, and John Dillinger were headlines of the era. Jobs were scarce and people needed a way to make money for their families. Gangs were dangerous, but they provided an easy way to make money. Prohibition was the main cause of this. After 13 long years, the government finally saw that prohibition was not working. It had created more of a problem than it solved. Finally, the government abolished the prohibition laws. Crime decreased, and the criminal element was taken out of the industry. Organized crime in the 1920s flourished in America because of prohibition, but it did not stop there. After the prohibition era, they simply went on to other markets with their newfound wealth. If anyone has seen The Great Gatsby, which happens to be one of my favorite movies, the one with Leonardo, of course, they know how glamorous and extravagant the parties in the 1920s were. Parties in the 20s consisted of loud music, dancing, and alcohol. The style of the 20s is probably my favorite thing about this era. I love everything from the clothes to the jewelry to the hair. Two of the most iconic fashions of the 20s were the cloche hat and the flapper dress. The cloche hat evolved from the wider brimmed hats of the decades in the past. The hair was often cut short and styled flat to fit under these types of hats. Often these hats and flapper dresses were worn together. The flapper style was more than just a dress. It embodied an entire lifestyle of the decade. Clothing styles consisted of more than just the cloche hat and the flapper dress. More casual clothing was introduced to the public. For example, women would start wearing pants now more and certain types of shoes. The men began to abandon formal wear as well. Children's clothing also changed in the 20s. Their clothing was designed to be more practical. More comfortable outfits such as rompers and short dresses were introduced instead of frilly lace dresses and other formal baby attire. Fashion in the 1920s was all about comfort. The men's pants got wider, and the women stopped wearing their corsets and their tight dresses. The elder women of the age considered this scandalous because they believed that the women shouldn't show their ankles. My favorite part is what the clothing looked like. The dresses were adorned with fur and sequins, and the colors were bright and pale, and often in dramatic combinations. Many of the fashions today are inspired by the fashions of the 1920s. Dresses decorated with sequins and sometimes fur were all in some way inspired by the flapper age. The style of dresses without a waistline or one drop to the low hip is also from that age. Gucci's recent runway lineup at Milan Fashion Week consisted of mainly pieces inspired by the flapper. Jewelry in the 1920s took a turn to simplicity and Art Deco in all styles from rings to necklaces to bracelets and earrings. It was in to wear semi-precious stones and fake plastics. To wear jewelry at all was considered to dress up. It was perfectly acceptable to wear none for day-to-day life. The jewelry in the 20s was focused on design rather than the value or the materials. Long pearl necklaces were the most iconic of all 20s jewelry pieces. Fake pearls now came in light pastel colors, such as pink, green, blue, and gray. Long beaded necklaces were equally as popular as pearls. One popular long necklace usually had a tassel hanging at the bottom or a large single gemstone pendant. Dog collars were the other main style of the 1920s neckwear. Bold Art Deco colors and especially black onyx were popular, which happens to be my favorite. Because of the short hair and cloche hats around the women's necks were now fully exposed. What better way to draw attention to the naked neck than the dangling drop earrings? They were long columns about 2 to 3 inches with small diamonds or rhinestones set in a filigree design. Diamonds were for formal evenings only. Wearing them during the day was seen as vulgar. They were still a sign of good wealth, although a diamond field discovery in South Africa made diamonds more plentiful and affordable for everyone. Gems for the day were semi-precious stones like jade, coral, turquoise, marcasite, onyx, and carnelian set in pure white, clear, or silver casings. If silver was unaffordable, sterling silver, silver plate, nickel, and zinc could be used to look like white gold. Yellow gold was out of fashion except for Egyptian revival jewelry. For formal occasions, earrings usually matched the hair clip or the headband that the woman was wearing. If evening hair was long enough to cover the ears, it was trendy to pull one side back and only wear one earring. During the day, a brooch pinned to the cloche hat would coordinate with the woman's earrings. Although many rings took on Art Deco shapes, the popular Art Nouveau style of filigree casings around precious stones, diamonds still ruled most of the 1920s. Stones were, however, cut in less traditional shapes such as squares, rectangles, or ovals. Some stood taller on the finger, especially when wearing them ungloved. A naked hand tickling the neck or tapping an earring was a not-so-subtle way of flirting in the 1920s. Birthstones instead of diamonds were also very popular to wear for everyday rings. Another highlight of the 20s that exemplified change was the evolution of women's hairstyles. Ladies were saying goodbye to their long Victorian locks and welcoming much shorter hairdos. The mass appeal of this trend wasn't accepted by many salons, so barbers become the go-to for 1920s hairdressing. Armed with close-cutting scissors called shears, these bold women were in well-trained hands. Elaborate and expensive jewels worn as headpieces added a feminine touch. 20s hairstyles fall into 5 categories. This one is the bob, the shingle cut, the Elton crop, the finger and Marcel waves, and finally the cropped curls. 1920s was the first decade to have a nickname, being the Roaring Twenties. It was a decade of prosperity and dissipation, and of jazz bands, bootleggers, fur coats, flappers, bootleggers, and marathon dancers. It was, in the popular view, the Roaring Twenties, when the younger generation started to rebel against the traditional views of their elders. To put everything in a nutshell, the 1920s were a time of change in the United States. I've given you a lot of information, but I hope that you found it as interesting as I did. Thank you so much for coming.